For our last question, I want to take seriously that Dr. King, Martin Luther in this case, that Dr. King tells us in his last public speech something that I'm just going to take to be true. Take it to be true or not, but he said that God took him up to the mountaintop and God showed him the promised land, and he said, may not get there with you, but we're certainly going to get there as a people. Now, Dr. King's pretty good at, he's a wordsmith, he's great at drawing the visuals, and I'm just going to take him at his word that in fact God took him up to the mountaintop, showed him the promised land. But here's what Dr. King doesn't do. He doesn't tell us what it looks like. He tells us that he had an opportunity to see it, but he doesn't tell us what the promised land is. So I am presuming that that lack of telling is also important. So here's my last question for everybody. If we're fighting for racial justice, and it's the same question that I asked Nia in a certain way, what's your promised land? What's your freedom dream? What does it taste like? I mean, I think there's definitely cookies in Baratunde's. What does it taste like? What does it smell like? Who's there? What are we doing? We're double dutching in mine. What's your freedom dream? Some tangible aspect of it. And by the way, y'all think about it too. You're standing on the mountaintop, you look over, it's the promised land. What do you see?
I'll answer that question. It's a very hard question, but I will answer it. But I was thinking about what you were saying about joy.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten so much about joy, especially after Omicron, because we were leaving, we were like about, well, at least, we were leaving our homes and going out, and then Omicron hit, and I think people just really got extra burnt out this winter, and so people are just really craving joy. And I think we're always working towards that rather than finding it in the present. And I think you could say that about utopia, or this idea of the promised land, is that it's not something that's necessarily like this blueprint, this utopic hope for the future. I mean, it is. It's important to strive for that. But to give you an example, just the moment, I remember when I was 9 months pregnant, and, Kara Walker.
Oh.
Yeah, she made this gigantic sugar sphinx in the Domino factory, which was this huge, beautiful, she calls it Mammy, she built in the sugar factory in Brooklyn, and it was a monument to all the slaves and workers who died working in the sugar plantations, and it was an homage to them. And there was this kind of scandal or controversy, right, when it was unveiled, that because this Mammy, when you went around the back, you could see her behind and her vulva. And so there was a lot of controversy about the fact that people were taking selfies and they weren't taking it seriously. And so that was what I was also expecting, and I was expecting to be mad at the audience, but then I waddled in 9 months pregnant, and that wasn't what I saw at all. What I saw was this audience of people who were just looking at the Sphinx in the most reverent manner. And it was like everyone. It was like black folks, Brooklyn black people who lived in Brooklyn. It was college students, and it was immigrant families with their kids. It was just, tourists, everyone, every kind of person. It wasn't just like fancy art types. And we were just like looking at her, and tears came to my eyes. And I was so moved, and I was like, this is what the promised land is. This is it. And I thought, we need just moments like that to keep the struggle alive, to keep us fighting. So I don't know what the promised land is, but I see it. I have days, I have moments when I see it. And that's what keeps me, that's what gives me strength.
It's a hard question to answer, but let me kind of start. I'm from San Antonio. Have any of y'all been to San Antonio? Yeah. Has anybody ever been to Fiesta in San Antonio? Like down to the Riverwalk? Folks had probably like a margarita on the Riverwalk? San Antonio has a river parade, in a parade of floats down the river in April that is somehow related to its city's founding. I grew up in San Antonio, and I had this image of when I was a kid. I grew up on the west side of San Antonio with my mother and my brother. When they had this river parade every year, it was striking to see the difference between the people who would sit on the sidelines, basically the banks of the river, in lawn chairs that had been set up, that had paid for the tickets to be able to sit there. And many of us who would watch from the bridges that run over the river, the streets, right? And I saw this when I was mayor and participated in the river parade. I would look up, and it wasn't as stark by this time, 25 years later or whatever, 30 years later. But the folks that were standing up there, you could tell they were browner. This is a very Latino city. Working class, more recent immigrants. And compared that to the folks sitting, in those lawn chairs on the banks of the river, enjoying their margaritas and dinner at the restaurants that line the Riverwalk. And when you ask me that question about what does the promised land look like, I think of those folks coming down and being able to watch that there, not just in the context of a parade, but in boardrooms and, in state legislatures and in the halls of Congress and in our great universities and physicians' offices and engineering labs and research institutions, so that you have people living together and working together that all are able to fully pursue their dreams in a time of respect for one another, where they're able to reach their full potential. Like, that's what I think of.
Yeah, it got me in a bit of a reverie. It's a beautiful question. It's a difficult one. In the promised land that's in my mind and heart at this moment, we all wake up at home. And at home is at the intersection of Joy Avenue and Freedom Boulevard. And we walk out our front doors and we wave to our neighbors. We make real eye contact. We don't necessarily have a long conversation, but we make real eye contact and just check in. And we tend to our garden. It's an actual garden that's also a metaphorical garden, reminding us of our connection to this earth that we have severed ourselves from. And that just settles our heart, settles our breathing before we leave home. And we walk, we do a lot of walking. We get our steps in the promised land.
Without the Fitbit.
We just feel it, you know what I'm saying? Fitbit of the mind. There's somebody in our household who gets called to civic duty. They got to actually serve in the legislature because they've been conscripted to do so, because that's how we do things in the promised land. Because we trust each other to govern ourselves, and we mean it. We probably walked past that memorial on the way, or some other similar totem to our painful past. And we do a little eye contact with that as well. And we see kids playing double dutch. And we join them. And we check in and do some steps, some right foot, and keep it moving. And we see someone who is unhoused, and we consider them our neighbor too. So we check in with them and make sure that that state that they're in is, as a phrase I just learned last week, is brief, it's rare, and it's non-recurring. Thank you, Built for Zero and Community Solutions, for that contribution to our promised land. And somebody's just come back from incarceration, and we throw a big parade to welcome them back to the intersection of Joy Street and Freedom Boulevard, where they've always belonged. And we greet them and we weep. And we acknowledge and honor them for paying the price they paid, and we welcome them back, and we let them back. And we let ourselves benefit from them. And we say, I'm so glad you're here. We've missed you. We've needed you. That's how the day starts in the process. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us here at the intersections of joy and freedom, where we can sit on the riverbanks together and appreciate the beauty and the art that comes even from the most painful moments of our history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian Castro.
We're hot mic.